I'm George Cheedy, and we're at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. Welcome to the next Atlanta. The issues facing our country and our city now are deeply rooted. What we've seen over the last few weeks in Atlanta is the result of and reaction to years and decades and centuries of systems that oppress and disenfranchise and offend the civil rights of one group of people, Black people in America. Racism is real. Systemic racism is real. And if we're ever going to see meaningful change, we have to talk about it on the next Atlanta. Today, citizen review boards are your power to police the police. This is the next Atlanta, and we're here to talk about policing the police. We've had huge protests, and one of the things that we're looking at is a Citizens Review Board. With me, I have Lee Reed, who runs Atlanta's Citizen Review Board. Lee, thanks for being here. Tell me about yourself.
I'm a Navy veteran. I have my law degree from North Carolina Central and an undergrad at Morehouse College. I started in this field after I practiced law in Minneapolis for about 3 years, and then I went to the Minneapolis Civilian Review Authority, running that agency, which is similar to the agency that we run here at the Atlanta Citizen Review Board.
So to be clear, you spent years in Minneapolis.
Yes.
On running the board that oversaw police misconduct. Tell me how Minneapolis and Atlanta are different from the perspective of a Citizens Review Board.
When I first came here in 2012, I was pleased to see that Atlanta did not have the challenges that Minneapolis was facing. When you talk about force, when you talk about the culture of the department, when you talk about the difficulty to work with the Minneapolis Police Department. And then when you throw in the union, with Minneapolis Police Department, it was tough. So coming here to Atlanta allowed me to be able to do more work with the department, with the community, and try to really make the change that we want to have with civilian oversight.
What effect does the Citizens Review Board here have on police culture, if any?
Changing police culture requires the hands of many. First, we have to understand that. Citizen Review Board is one tool to be able to do that. It also requires citizen involvement and engagement with the Citizen Review Board, elected officials who are paying attention to information and data that comes out of the Citizen Review Board, and a police department that is cooperative with working with the structure. We offer the citizens of Atlanta an effective process that allows them to be able to come to the board, express their grievances, have an investigation, participate in mediation, learn about their rights and responsibilities, and get some redress. Now, one of the challenges is the discipline that comes out of those investigations. We're not where we want to be, but we are working towards making it better.
So how, when you say the discipline, you mean the ability of the Citizens Review Board to impose a penalty?
Correct.
So what would you want to see different? What power should a Citizens Review Board actually have?
The Citizen Review Board should have the power that when they make their decisions, that they're taken seriously by the police department, of a thorough examination of what the board has come up with, and take some action on that complaint. That's what needs to occur. Now, in a perfect world, that would be 100% of the time. Unfortunately, the way that many of the civilian review boards, civilian oversight agencies are set up, you don't have the power to make the police department discipline. That's one of the things we want to address in some new legislation, is being able to have a process in place that when there's a disagreement between the police department and the ACRB, that we're able to go to someone who can make a binding decision that's outside of both departments, that will fairly evaluate the evidence, fairly evaluate the complaint, and make that decision that we would be bounding on both departments.
Who would this outside entity be?
I believe that it should be an independent person who has the knowledge and training, more likely a lawyer or a judge, who could evaluate everything, listen to what the citizen board and the police department has to say, and make that decision.
Yeah. Should a Citizens Review Board have the power to fire a police officer?
I believe that the Citizen Review Board should have the power to weigh in on what happens to that officer. In any employment situation, whether someone should be fired or terminated, there are many things that go into it. I don't know if an outright saying this person is fired could be the end, but I do believe that the board should be able to weigh in and be taken seriously about the officer being fired. Now, what happens is the board may make a recommendation to have an officer terminated, and it's totally ignored. That should not happen.
Should a Citizens Review Board be able to subpoena records to compel a witness?
Yes, we have in Atlanta, we have subpoena power. We've had subpoena power since 2010. And I believe that that is another one of those tools that's important to civilian oversight. Yes.
So part of my role as I'm looking at all of this stuff is to interrogate ideas, like try to get at it from every different angle. One of the things that I have heard in terms of a criticism of Citizens Review Boards as an idea is that it diffuses responsibility. That like a mayor or city council should be making calls on maybe who gets hired or fired or what discipline should look like, and that by pushing it off to a bunch of folks who've been appointed and aren't elected, that they're abrogating their own responsibilities.
Elected officials do have a responsibility, especially when you look at those elected officials who hire the chief. They should hold the chief accountable for making those decisions. What I've seen in my experience, that's not an area that a lot of elected officials want to get into. Because one, understanding everything that goes along with policing, that goes along with the disciplinary process takes time. Two, there are competing interests out in the community about we love police, we don't like police, but we're concerned about what police are doing. And it's been my experience, some elected officials don't want to necessarily get into that murky water. But there are times when it's needed.
So why don't more communities have a Citizens Review Board now?
A lot of that is related to the power of the police department and the influence that they have on the elected officials. So that makes it challenging to get that movement going. Now, what happens in some cities, like with here in Atlanta, there's a tragedy that occurs. And out of that tragedy, the community goes, no, we want something. We want something to be able to bring our grievances to, and that's going to be able to investigate outside of the police department. Policing is one of those entities that you have to be paying attention to every day. And that's what civilian oversight does. It pays attention to what's happening in the police department every day. And having that citizen involvement through filing complaints, through looking at and reviewing data that comes out of the department, allows them to be in a position to question the police department, to question the elected officials about why isn't this change occurring?
Lee, I'm incredibly grateful for your time. I'm glad you've been able to speak with us.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it. And I applaud the series that you all are doing. I think this is important to be able to have this conversation in the community.
We're here at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. This is the Next Atlanta, and we're talking about citizen review boards. I'm here with Representative Mabel Thomas, who, among other things, represents the English Avenue area of Atlanta. and has a tremendous history both in the city and on this topic. And so thank you very much for joining us. Would you, again, tell us a little bit about yourself, and in particular in context of the Citizens Review Boards and your personal history around that?
I'm a native Atlantan, born and raised and live in the same house that I was born and raised in, so I'm really on the ground for real. I went to Georgia State University, and that's when I learned my organizing skills. I organized at Georgia State. From that, I ran for a state representative as a graduate student out of Georgia State. I sort of made my trademark being available for people to approach me and available to stand up to the powers that be, even though I'm quote unquote the power to be.
There are a lot of calls for policy change and new laws, and one of the things that people are talking about are citizen review boards. Tell us about the Citizens Review Board and your sort of experience with it here.
Okay, well, first I want to put it in context. That was a Citizens Review Board. It must have been maybe in the 80s. There was a Citizens Review Board before this one. If I'm not mistaken, this one came in place either 2006/2007. And it came about because of the police misconduct as it relates to killing the 92-year-old grandmother. But it wasn't so much even that they killed her. Catherine Johnson.
Yeah.
But they tried to cover it up. And so as a part of that organizing, the community asked me would I kind of look at and be the point person. And what we did is that we never thought for a minute that she wasn't innocent. So no matter what press asked us, we always said, there's no way she could be a drug dealer. You know, whether it was the informant or whatever, never could she be a drug dealer. And she was a mother of our community. However, once she was murdered, then we asked for change. And what we did is if people recall, $5 million went to the family. And usually if you're 92 years old, they give you money based upon how long you may have lived. $5 million was a lot of money. $5 million, we helped disband the Red Dog. There was something on the books called DC-6 where you could be in an area they call a known drug area, and they could put you down on the ground, search you, and then even arrest you. Also, the 3 officers were arrested and went to jail, and we created a Citizen Review Board. And so the Citizen Review Board comes in place, and where citizens now, if they feel they've been mistreated by the police, they can go. However, it has not worked as good in practice as it has on paper.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. What's it doing right? What's it doing wrong?
The way it's set up, the first when it was set up, it didn't have no level of subpoena powers. Now it has a level of subpoena power. However, after you get all the information that's being gathered, my understanding is then it goes to the police chief. So now it's up to a person who works with them, which you remember that thing they call the blue code, the blue code or whatever they call it, where I believe a police chief would be reluctant. If there's any doubt, it's almost like the people got to prove without a reasonable doubt, as if they're in a court, that this officer did the thing that they say they committed, the crime or whatever they felt they committed. And subsequently, that's a great burden on a community person to come in and try to convince anybody. And then at the end of the day, it goes to the police chief. I talked to a couple of members on the board, and what they told me is that they would like to maybe be a dual reporting where it also reports not only just to the police chief, but maybe to the mayor. And so they would have at least a little flexibility. So what happens is, I make a complaint about the police, but then when it's time for me to go to appear before it, I might not show up. And I'm like trying to figure out why wouldn't people show up if they made the complaint? So it seems to me that there's still not a lot of the type of confidence in that body because they see so many situations where people are getting killed and people are being treated bad or tased, and when they felt they shouldn't have been, they were just doing this and they thought they were being peaceful and they actually get in a confrontation with the police. So what we get built in not in Atlanta but in America is a situation where people fear the police. Not so much that they fear them because they the police, They fear because what they've seen on TV is that you can have a basic confrontation with the police that could escalate. And before you know it, you're on the ground, slammed to the ground, locked up, and your life has shifted, and sometimes you die.
Could you go to the mayor and say, your citizen review board needs to be able to do this too? Like, or go to Felicia Moore and go to the city council and say, here are the things we need out of a citizens review board that it's not delivering right now. What changes would you propose?
Well, I'll tell you this, the body that you should go to is the city council. It's almost like this: if there's not an outcry around the citizen review board by the public, then everything just goes the same. The executive director does what he does. The people who come to on the board do what they do. And it's like we're just doing a process. So what it is that it has to have a relevance, not that necessarily that on paperwork it don't have relevance, to the public. The average person you walk up to and ask them about the citizen review board, they don't know what you're talking about.
Let's say we're outside of Atlanta. Let's say you're in Johns Creek or anywhere, any municipality in Georgia. And you're looking at setting up a citizens review board, regardless of whether or not there's police misconduct that's rising to public attention. What advice do you have? Like, would you tell them, here are the things you need to do and look at in order to get a citizens review board going?
Well, I would say that it must, number one, it must have community people that's respected by the community on the board. You must have someone who's the executive director who is really committed to a result and not committed to make sure they keep their job and keep everything safe. Because people get jobs and they be safe. They have to be safe. They want to make sure they keep their job. And not that I'm saying this happened, because the gentleman that's over there seems to be pretty aggressive and assertive around it. It must have subpoena powers where you can have the police or their representatives come in and initially I say, I don't think that was happening. And you must put as much emphasis on the Citizens Review Board as any other board that you have that meet, whether it's a pension board, it has to have the same amount of not notoriety, but the same amount of respect that other boards have. And what I think is that as long as nobody's saying anything at all negative about it, then people say, well, it must be working. But the city council must, on its own, as well as the public, demand that the Citizen Review Board be looked at to improve it, because if it was in place 2006 and 7, where are we at now? We at 2020.
Representative Mabel Thomas, you've been amazing. I'm deeply grateful. You are a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on these issues.
You bet. Again, I'm George Cheedy. This is The Next Atlanta, and we are at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. I'm here with Vince Champion. Vince, tell us about yourself.
I'm a retired police officer out of Florida. Spent 22 years actually on the street and in training for the last 8 years of my career. I've worked for the state attorney's office in Florida. I have been either a vice president or president of a police union since I started in law enforcement. When I retired and left the road, I moved up back to Atlanta, and I now am the regional director for the International Brotherhood of Police Officers here in Atlanta, which we have the honor to represent the APD.
The things that we're looking at here in Atlanta, one of them is Citizens Review Board. Atlanta has a relatively strong Citizens Review Board, at least on paper. What I'm wondering from your perspective is, first, do you believe that the Citizens Review Board is effective from the perspective of a police officer?
Not as it is today. And the reason I say that, as we have in Atlanta today, the reason I say that is they don't really have, they don't listen to them. The city doesn't listen to them. For instance, we've had officers that have gone before their case has gone before the review board, and the review board has either said discipline or no discipline. And they've turned right around and done whatever they've decided to do. And one of the issues that we would have liked to see, meaning the union and speaking with Mr. Reed, if an officer goes through the citizen review board and he is found to be, it didn't happen or unsustained or anything of that nature, that's where it ends. Because the assumption is the citizen review board taking somebody who's a non-biased, they're just a civilian to look at these, and attorneys and different people to look at the laws and stuff, can say, no, there's nothing here. Then that should be the end of it. However, APD, a lot of the times will turn around, not listen to their recommendations, put the officers through OPS, Office of Professional Standards, and go through a whole internal affairs investigation when we just went through an investigation with the Civil Service Board. So my question then, if we have the Civil Service Board and they have a function, then let them have the function. If they don't have the function and you're just gonna keep doing multiple investigations till, I don't know, you get the answer that you want, then why do we need the board? As far as we're concerned, we're fine with the board. We have no issue with the board.
What do you think the proper role of a citizens review board? And we're looking at Atlanta, but I'm trying to think broadly, because there are a lot of communities outside of Atlanta that don't actually have a citizens review board and might be considering that right now.
Well, the Citizen Review Board should be the group that the community can say is representing us. Some review boards, they've got subpoena powers and a lot of other powers that that's really not their function. Their function is to look at it, and what we feel it is, to let the citizens look at it and determine, did we act proper or did we not? And as long as they have, legal minds in there and they talk with the chief and other police command staff to get the explanation of to why maybe that happened, reading the policies and go from there, I think they're a good middle ground between, you're not gonna really put a shooting. I mean, you can have them look at it, but that's gonna be more, here in Atlanta, it's GBI that does that, and then it goes back in through the citizens, or through the OPS. But with the citizens overlooking, car accidents, misuse, or we talked bad to somebody, or we didn't do a report right, I think that's, should be their role.
As we've been talking with other folks about the Citizens Review Board, one of the key things that I keep hearing over and over again is that people want to have input on, they want a mechanism where they believe that they'll be heard when they have a complaint about an officer. But the Citizens Review Board in Atlanta emerged in part because of a terrible shooting, a Katherine Johnston case from about 10 years ago. It's part of the reason that the Citizens Review Board has subpoena power, for example. Is Atlanta's Citizen Review Board a model?
The actual board as it functions, yeah, I think the way that it lines up and what their duties are and how it's set up. The issue becomes, what does the police department want to do? Do they want to accept their good, bad, or indifferent? Do they want to accept what the review board says, or do they not? And I think that's where some of these issues are coming. Now, first off, I don't think it's the review board's job to advertise to people to come in and complain on police officers. However, if they have a complaint, if someone has a complaint on a police officer, now, the question is, a lot of people say, is it a valid complaint? At the end of the day, if the perception to that person is that they were treated wrong, it's a valid complaint. I mean, it can be investigated and looked into whether actually anything's done wrong and go by the policies and things of that nature. But if someone actually feels that they've been wrong, then they have the right and should have the right to go in and complain about that.
Based on what you've heard out in terms of the things that people want to see or talked about, policy, is there anything in particular where you would draw a red line? You say, this is where we will fight to keep this from happening?
Defunding the police department or getting rid of any police agencies, that would be the hard line, because I was asked what if we took a social worker and put them in the police car and we have the person there? That's just another person that we have to take into a dangerous situation. However, with that being said, if the city or county government or the federal government would fund more social workers, that when I go out, I don't have to wait an hour or 2 hours for a social worker to come. There's one on call that will be there in 10 or 15 minutes. That gets the help that the person needs. That gets the officer back to having to handle hot calls or the calls. But there's a lot of ways to move money around. And when I negotiate contracts, I've looked at budgets. And when we're talking about putting flowers in places that up and down a highway, or we're talking about a park that's, less than a mile from 3 other parks, do we need that, or do we need to take that money, whether you give it to the police or not, or do we put it in social benefits that will get me officers another social worker, will get me a therapist who can come out to do that? There's a lot of societal issues that go hand in hand with what we do, that we would stand up and sit and support and argue with the councils to get just with everybody else.
Got it. Mr. Champion, I'm incredibly grateful. It's important that we hear from the representatives of police in this conversation. I don't think an answer comes without this.
I appreciate it. Thank you for asking. That's part of the problem. A lot of media do not even ask us.
I hope what you've heard today is clear. Citizen review boards are critical in our communities because they're how we police the police. Whether it's violation of standard operating procedures or flagrant abuse of power, the ability for regular citizens like you and me to have our complaints heard and investigated is absolutely necessary. That's how you build trust. When we empower these boards with funding and subpoena powers, and when we put in place strong leadership, the city has to listen. 2 things that have become clear. 1, it has to be a very transparent process for you and I to access a citizens review board with a complaint. And if you're going to have a citizens review board, you really need to listen to what it says. Because at the end of the day, all of these government institutions, from the police chief down to the new recruit, they work for you. They need to be accountable to you, too. If you want Atlanta's review board to have the power to initiate disciplinary actions, let your city council person know. If you have a complaint against Atlanta police, large or small, go to acrbgov.org now and let them know. And if you don't have a citizen review board in your community, demand one. Next week on The Next Atlanta, a mile in my shoes, a perspective from people who are on the front lines of the question about police brutality. We're talking to regular people and regular cops about their experiences in Atlanta, and we'll look at bias training next Sunday on The Next Atlanta.